There's something interesting about new moms. You ever notice there's a pattern when you have a new mom spending time with her mom? A grandmother will take the baby to feed it or hold it or whatever, and a new mom will be like, no, you have to hold it this way or you have to hold it that way, and put on their helmet and turn on the white noise at 2.6 decibels, and the angle has to be, very particular, right? And grandmothers are like, yeah, I didn't raise the three of you myself, right? And the mom is like, yeah, look how I turned out. That's why I'm doing it different, right? So, so there's a tension between the wisdom of an old experienced mother and the currency of a new mother, right? There's a transfer of position that neither of them really seem to be comfortable with. And the thing about a new mom is they want to be nice because they love their mom, but they're also the ones that are now in charge and doing it, and they love their child and their word, and they want to protect him or her with everything they've got. Well, today we're looking at a situation that's a little bit reminiscent of that. It's a transfer of position from one prophet to the next, and the love and protection of those who care for others. So we're continuing on in our series of the prophets of Israel. If you're following along with your sermon notes, today's message is called Elisha, Part 1. And we're mostly going to be in 2 Kings, but we still have some 1 Kings things to handle as well. So this morning we're switching to the life of Elisha with an SH. And the thing that's interesting about this is you can't really talk about Elisha without addressing Elijah. So it's going to make it a little confusing, so I'll try to over-enunciate if I can to be clear about who I'm talking about. But before we get into it, let's do a quick recap so that we're all caught up on where we are right now. So Israel's prophets started with Moses, and then they took the promised land as a nation, and the judges ruled directly under God's authority. But eventually the nation wanted a king, so they got Saul, and then David, and then Solomon. But then the kingdom of Israel split in two, Israel in the north and Judah in the south. Well, then Judah got an evil king named Ahab, and he had an evil wife named Jezebel. Now they were evil because they brought in Baal worship, and they persecuted God's prophets in Israel and pushed them out. Well, last week we saw God's response to that. He brought in a guy named Elijah. And Elijah brought things like drought and famine, and God cared for him miraculously during that time. And then God went face to face with Baal in a sacrifice competition where Baal's prophets laid down a bull and they danced around and called on Baal, but nothing happened. And then Elijah laid down a sacrifice and soaked it with water and called on the name of the Lord, and fire came down and consumed everything, including the water. And then everyone there returned to God, and they killed all of Baal's prophets. But then, of course, Queen Jezebel hears about this, the evil queen, and she swears that she's going to kill Elijah, so Elijah has to go into hiding again, and he's angry, but God gives him another job. And that brings us to today. When we last saw Elijah, this is the final work that God gave him to do in 1 Kings 19:15. It says, "And the Lord said to him, 'Go, return on your way to the wilderness of Damascus. And when you arrive, you shall anoint Hazael to be king over Syria, and Jehu, the son of Nimshi, you shall anoint to be king over Israel. And Elisha, the son of Shaphat of Abel-Meholah, you shall anoint to be prophet in your place. And the one who escapes from the sword of Hazael shall Jehu put to death, and the one who escapes from the sword of Jehu shall Elisha put to death.'" Okay, so God says, Elijah, go anoint 2 kings, and then anoint a new prophet. And they're going to take care of this Baal problem and with Ahab and Jezebel and all that. Now, that's a little bit different than the way it ends up working out. What actually happens is Elijah does anoint Elisha to be the new prophet, but Elisha is the one that then takes over and handles the kings. So let's go on to 1 Kings 19:19. "So he departed from there and found Elisha, the son of Shaphat, who was plowing with 12 yoke of oxen in front of him, and he was with the 12th. Elijah passed by him and cast his cloak upon him," or yours might say a mantle. So Elisha is probably in his 20s, and he's out in the field and he's working. He owns a bunch of oxen, or at least his dad does, so he's probably a fairly wealthy guy plowing the land, and he's minding his own business, doing his job, okay? And suddenly this guy walks by and throws his cloak on him, and then just keeps on walking like nothing happened. Okay, so it's a little bit of a strange situation. Now, this cloak is a special cloak called a mantle. This doesn't mean that he hit him with his fireplace as he was walking by, okay? This is a special kind of garment. A mantle was a garment that prophets wore as a sign of who they were. So I'm going to give you a little bit of a display this morning about what a mantle actually looked like. So you would take kind of a giant piece of fabric here, and you put it on yourself sort of the way that you would put on a scarf. And you wrap it around like this, and then you could take the back and you kind of pull it up over your head like a hood, and then you walk around and people would know that you're a prophet. Now, when I saw myself do that this morning, I was like, man, that looks good. I'm gonna keep that. But I'm going to take it off so that I'm not distracting to all of you this morning. But that's what they would wear. That's how they did it. It was kind of a uniform. Like if you see a person in our society today wearing a blue badge, right? Or wearing a blue, uniform with a badge, you probably assume that they're a cop, right? Or if you see somebody who's wearing some camo BDUs and they're walking around, you probably think they're a soldier, right? Or you see someone in a jacket on stage and they're probably a pastor on Mother's Day. So a mantle like this was sort of the prophet's uniform. Okay, this is what they wore. And Elijah just took his uniform and threw it onto Elisha. All right, so this is a symbolic thing. So let's see what happens next in 1 Kings 19:20. And he left the oxen and ran after Elijah and said, "Let me kiss my father and mother, and then I will follow you." And he said to him, "Go back again, for what have I done to you?" And he returned from following him and took the yoke of oxen and sacrificed them and boiled their flesh with the yokes of the oxen and gave it to the people, and they ate. Then he arose and went after Elijah and assisted him. So this is an interesting scene. Elijah throws his mantle on him and just keeps on walking. And Elisha chases him down and says, "Let me go back and kiss my mom and dad, and then I'm going to follow you." And Elijah's like, "I never told you to do anything like that." He just threw the mantle on him and went by. So Elijah's like, "Go back, what do I care? I didn't really do anything." And then Elisha, he grabs the yokes, the wooden beams that were laid across the oxen there, and he lit them on fire. He made a fire. He killed the oxen. He cooked them up, and he fed everybody, which seems like a weird thing to do, but it actually makes a lot of sense. There's actually a very strong message behind this. It's very simple. He's saying, I'm going to burn this stuff up and feed it to you guys because I'm not going to need it anymore. Right? I'm off to a new calling. I won't have any time for plowing anymore. He's essentially saying, I'm never coming back. I'm going to follow Elijah as my master. I'm committed to him. I'm not leaving his side. Now, who does this? If somebody walked by you and you're at work and they threw a uniform on your shoulders and kept walking by, you probably wouldn't get up and run after them and be like, "I'm going to go kiss my mom and dad and then I'm going to go follow you," right? They'd be like, "Okay, weirdo." And you'd be like, "Well, you're the one that threw a uniform on me. That's just as weird." So either what was going on here is either Elijah knew what was going on because they talked and there's just no dialogue included in Scripture, but I think he just knew what was going on. I think this might have even been some kind of a test, right? If I throw the mantle on you, are you going to know what this means? Which makes sense, right? I think he just knew because, hello, prophet, right? He's like, okay, I got the mantle, now I got a mission. I'm off. Now, I think it's very important here that we understand that what would have happened is that Elijah essentially adopted Elisha as his son at this point, okay? Remember that as we go, because that applies to a couple of things later on. So from this point, Elisha becomes number 2 to Elijah's number 1, okay? He operates under him as an apprentice for like 7 to 8 years, okay? Now, that's about as long as I served under Pastor Glenn Myers at Life Point Church in California. 7 to 8 years, I kind of apprenticed under him, right? Now, at times, 7 to 8 years felt like a long time, like, oh, I'm really prepared, I'm ready. But in hindsight, 7 to 8 years doesn't even feel like enough to me. At the end, I still had a lot to learn, and I still feel like I have a lot to learn now. So here's your first fill in the blank this morning, church. If you grab your Connect card, here's your first one. Always take advantage of your time to learn. Always take advantage of your time to learn. Sometimes we're in a hurry to just get through the learning phase so we can get to the doing. But then when we start doing, it's like, oh man, I wish I would have paid attention when I was supposed to be learning. It's funny because if we talk about Elisha, if you even knew who he was before today, you probably think of him as Elijah's number 2. Like that's his identity in your mind. But oddly enough, when Elisha became number 1 after this, his ministry goes on for another 60 years after this. So he's 7 to 8 years under Elijah, 60 plus years by himself, being the number 1 guy. So we connect him as a counterpart, but learning was actually probably only 10% of what he did. But do you think Elisha really cares either way, the way that we look at him? Like he's up in heaven right now going, you should have thought of me as number one. I don't think so, right? I'm sure there are lots of people in California who still think of me as Glenn's number two, right? And I'm okay with that, and sometimes I wish I still was. It was nice to have somebody over me when I didn't know what to do to go ask him, I don't know. So anyway, last week we looked at Elijah's life, and I mentioned that he had a wild exit. Well, now's the time where it's actually going to take place. So let's see how this goes. 2 Kings chapter 2, verse 1. Now, when the Lord was about to take Elijah up to heaven by a whirlwind, Elijah and Elisha were on their way from Gilgal. And Elijah said to Elisha, "Please stay here, for the Lord has sent me as far as Bethel." But Elisha said, "As the Lord lives and as you yourself live, I will not leave you." So they went down to Bethel. So notice that Elisha absolutely refuses to leave Elijah's side. Why? Well, there's two reasons. First, there's a macro reason, a big picture reason, right? He's just dedicated overall to Elijah. So he doesn't want to leave his side. It's like Scooby-Doo will never leave Shaggy's side no matter what, right? That kind of thing, right? He's just always with him. So this is pure loyalty on Elisha's part. Now, Elisha was dedicated to his calling and his purpose to God, and so that meant that he was going to be with his mentor. But there's also a micro reason here, something that's in the more immediate future why he's staying by his side. And we can see that in 2 Kings chapter 2, verse 3. And the sons of the prophets who were in Bethel came out to Elisha and said to him, "Do you know that today the Lord will take your master away from over you?" And he said, "Yes, I know. Keep quiet." Now this happens a total of 3 times. Elijah says, "Hey, I'm going over there, you stay here." And Elisha says, "No, I'm going with you." And then other guys say, "Hey, you know he's leaving you today." And he says, "Yeah, I know, shut up." This happens 3 times in a row in Scripture. The micro reason that Elisha doesn't want to leave Elijah's side at this point is because he knows his master is leaving today. He's trying to get in the way of this, to be with him, at least as long as he can, if not to stop it. Now, I'm picturing Elisha at this point just grabbing onto Elijah's leg right now. "Please don't go," and he's dragging him through, He's like, "Come on, Elisha, geez," right? That's kind of what I'm picturing. And so my question to you is, are you dedicated to anything in your life that much? And if so, what is it that you're dedicated to? Some people choose to be that dedicated to their church body, but other people decide that it's time to leave at the first sight of something that they don't like. Some people are dedicated to their spouses, while others just want to up and leave as soon as things get difficult. Well, here's what we need to know, church, your next fill in the blank. Loyalty and commitment are very important. Loyalty and commitment are very important. Oftentimes, we want to look for the short-term gain with a little bit of effort, right? But those type of rewards often fall short of our expectations. Personally, I'm very dedicated to my wife, and as a result of that, there's somebody in this world who knows me better than anyone ever will. And that makes me think of couples that have been together for like 50, 60 years, right? And you see them, and then you see that they're still in love, and there's a fruit there that shows up that only comes by working with dedication for a long period of time. When I was in high school, we used to go to a Presbyterian church, and there was an old couple who was in their 80s back then. And I think their names were Herman and Maxine Smith. And she'd show up in a dress that she had made herself for her Sunday best, beautiful, flowery fabric, all done up and cute with, a little hat on with the same fabric as her dress and the hat and all that kind of stuff, right? And she'd be right there on Herman's arm, and he'd be beaming as if it was their first date, all smiling, and he'd be wearing his suit with a big smile on his face, and his tie and his handkerchief in his pocket were made out of the same material that her dress and hat band were. And they just walk in. It's like, come on, this was like so adorable, right? They spent 50, 60 years together, and they still loved each other. They built something meaningful together. But in order to keep that kind of love for that amount of time, it had to take hard work. And honestly, church, there's an element there that's really important if you're going to make something like that work, and it's called humility, right? Anybody in here ever been in a dumb argument with their spouse? Right? "I'm hungry, there's nothing to eat." Yes, there is. Open your eyes. Next thing you know, it's World War III because you asked if there's something to eat, right? The only way to survive things like that is to say, be humble, let me apologize for my part in this, right? Humility can be incredibly challenging, but that's the way that we build important things. And there's an interesting degree of humility in this story as well. Let's see if you can catch it. 2 Kings chapter 2, verse 8. Then Elijah took his cloak and rolled it up and struck the water, and the water was parted to the one side and to the other, till the two of them could go over on dry ground. When they had crossed, Elijah said to Elisha, "Ask what I shall do for you before I am taken from you." And Elisha said, "Please let there be a double portion of your spirit on me." So Elijah parts the river, and he walks across, just like God parted the Red Sea when Moses was there and rescuing his people, right? Just like God parted the Jordan when Israel went over to take the promised land. Now we see that he's parting the Jordan for Elijah. Remember that. We're going to come back to it. And now Elijah turns to Elisha and says, "Hey, what do you want out of all this?" And he asks for a double portion of Elijah's spirit. Now you probably hear that and think, well, wait a second, that doesn't sound a whole lot like humility to me. Well, that's because a lot of people read this and they think he's saying, "Hey, Elijah, make me twice as good as you." But that's not what he's saying. Look at it. If you actually pay attention to what's going on here and you think back to the book of Deuteronomy, you could probably make a connection there. Remember I mentioned that Elisha was like a son to Elijah, right? And if we flip over to Deuteronomy chapter 21, verse 17, it says, "But he shall acknowledge the firstborn, the son of the unloved, by giving him a double portion of all that he has, for he is the firstfruits of his strength. The right of the firstborn is his." So the right of a firstborn child in Israel was that they would be entitled to a double portion. But that doesn't mean he gets twice as much as his dad had, right? It couldn't possibly be that. If I were to die today and leave $1 million to my kids, well, first it'd be a miracle. But if I were to die today and leave $1 million to my kids and Ronnie said, "Hey, Dad, I want a double portion," he wouldn't get $2 million. Right? There's only $1 million to take from, right? No, Grace would get $333,000 and he would get $667,000 because he has a double portion, right? His portion would be bigger, but still less than the whole thing. That's what Elisha is asking for. He wants to have twice as much as the other prophets that are working with Elijah, but he doesn't want twice what Elijah has. He only wants a portion of what Elijah has. He wants to get the inheritance of a firstborn son, okay? And this should tell us something, church. Here's your next fill in the blank. We should petition God with boldness and humility together. It's bold to ask for a double portion, but it's also humble to ask for less than what is there. He's basically saying, "Elijah, you're a great prophet. You love the Lord. You've served him well. I want to be the one to carry that burden, even if it's only partial." This is a "here I am, Lord, send me" type of moment. Right? I want to serve in just a fraction of the way that you have, right? He's asking for Elijah's spirit, but what he's really asking for is the Spirit of God, right? Because Elijah gets it from God. So he's asking for that inheritance to be left for him. Now, I tried to learn that lesson under Glenn in California. I've only ever wanted to be a fraction of the pastor that he was, and I would say that's about where I've landed. And I'm okay with that. Let's go on to verse 10. And he said, "You've asked for a hard thing, yet if you see me as I am being taken from you, it shall be so for you. But if you do not see me, it shall not be so." So Elijah says, that's not really something I can give you. It's God's Spirit that's working in me as he sees fit. So if you see me, then God will give it to you. But if you don't, then the Lord doesn't want you to have it. I'm sorry. It's not mine to give. Okay, so let's see how this works out. Verse 11. "And as they still went on and talked, behold, chariots of fire and horses of fire separated the two of them, and Elijah went up by a whirlwind into heaven. And Elisha saw it, and he cried, my father, the chariots of Israel and its horsemen. And he saw him no more. Then he took hold of his own clothes and tore them in two pieces." So Elijah and Elisha are walking and talking. And remember, Elisha's trying not to leave his side for as long as he can. And suddenly these chariots and horses of fire shoot between them and separate them. And then it causes this tornado. And Elijah gets sucked up in the tornado. And then he yells, my father, the chariots of Israel and its horsemen." And he's so distraught that he rips his robes, which is a sign of weeping and mourning. Elisha is devastated. His master is gone. But Even though he's devastated, he knows that now it's time to get to work. So he starts to move. 2 Kings 2:13. And he took up the cloak of Elijah that had fallen from him and went back and stood on the bank of the Jordan. Then he took the cloak of Elijah that had fallen from him, and he struck the water, saying, "Where is the Lord, the God of Elijah?" And when he had struck the water was parted to the one side and to the other, and Elisha went over. Now when the sons of the prophets who were at Jericho saw him opposite them, they said, "The spirit of Elijah rests on Elisha." And they came to meet him and bowed to the ground before him. So Elisha picks up that mantle, the cloak, right, from Elijah, the one that was thrown over his shoulders when he was first called into this ministry. And he calls on the God of Elijah to move the same way that he moved for his mentor. And he touches the cloak to the river, and it parts exactly the same way it did for Elijah. It seems that he asked for the double portion, and this confirms, yes, you got it. You are now the one in charge. And all the other prophets see this, and they agree. It's like, okay, I guess Elisha is sitting in Elijah's seat now. But it's interesting because it's like, yes, he's taken over. There's this passing of the baton, this great moment. But then things immediately start to get difficult for him. All the prophets go to Elisha, and they say, hey, we should go look for Elijah. And they say, well, maybe God sucked him up in that tornado, and they chucked him over there. Maybe he's in the mountains, or maybe he chucked him into a valley. Let's go walk over there and see if we can find him. And Elisha says, dude, that is stupid. We're not going to go look for Elijah. God didn't fling him over into a valley. He took him up to heaven. And then they all start to shame him. Well, I thought you loved your master. Were you just trying to take the power for yourself? Now you don't even want to go look for him? What if he's hurt or injured in the mountains? We should go look for him. Come on, man, you're not a very good servant. And they're shaming him. And Elisha is shamed to the point where he says, fine, let's go look. Or he says, you guys go look. He's not going, but he says, you guys go ahead and look. So they go, they look, they come back, and they're like, hey, guess what? We couldn't find him. And Elisha's like, duh, I told you. He was taken up to heaven. You're not going to find him in the valley. Church, it's hard to be a new leader. No one trusts you, and yet you're still in charge, right? People expect you to be nice to them to earn trust, but they're ready to abandon you at the first mistake that you make. You have to make these decisions, but you don't have all the information that other people around you might have. I had to learn the value of going slow as a new leader after my time in North Carolina. That's why I chose to move slow once I got here. And it's interesting, a pastor friend of mine, we were talking months ago, and he was telling me that he had been given advice when he took over a new church to take it slow. I was like, okay, take it slow. That's good advice. Well, we ended up talking later, and he said that he had plans that he was going to change the name of the church, rewrite the Constitution, switch out all the elders, reappoint all the ministry leaders, paint the building, and break away from their church planting organization. This was 9 months after he started. And I was hearing this, and I was like, wow, that's really fast. And as he goes on with the story, he's like, yeah, and they asked me to resign. Yeah, that kind of makes sense. Because you know what you never took the time to actually do? You never tried to learn the history of or the culture of the church. You never asked questions about why things were the way they were. You never tried to build relationships with the leaders of the church. No, you just wanted to change everything your way immediately, and you got bucked. Here's your next fill in the blank, church. New leaders should take time with their people. New leaders should take time with people. Sometimes we have to step back and ask what's really important. Is it to hurry up and do a task or make money or change the aesthetic? Or is it more important to focus on people and relationships and their spiritual health? So I always try to encourage new leaders to take their time when they're first at a new place, to first learn and love the people, build their trust, and then you start worrying about changing stuff. Now, you may disagree with that. I know a lot of people are like, no, when you're brand new, that's your time to change everything because they're used to change already and, do it all right away. That's okay if you disagree, but I think it's by far better to learn people and love them first. Now, I think that it was wise for Elisha to say, go ahead and look for Elijah. It's a bad idea, but as the new leader, I'd rather build trust with you and let you go do something that is stupid in order for you to trust me and respect me. He knew it was dumb, but he wanted to build trust. But he wasn't done being challenged yet, because the next challenge is right around the corner. Let's look at one more story about Elisha. 2 Kings chapter 2, verse 23. He went up from there to Bethel, and while he was going up on the same way, some small boys came out of the city and jeered at him, saying, "Go up, you bald head! Go up, you bald head!" Okay, now, first of all, that's like the worst clown I've ever heard in my life. Go up, you bald head? Like, that's the best you got? There's 42 boys here at least, and that's the best they can come up with. Okay, go up, you bald head. It's like Rodney Dangerfield. Elisha can't get no respect. But not only do his counterparts disrespect him by not wanting to listen to him and by shaming him, but now these boys, which I'm guessing they're probably, it says small boys there, but really this is probably talking about like teenagers, maybe even young men, maybe middle schoolers, which would make sense with the go up you bald head thing, right? So, but like these are like older boys, right? So, and they're sitting there and they're making fun of him. Now, I mentioned that new leaders should make an effort to lead their teams the right way. But the truth is that the people who follow new leaders should also do their part to respect their new leaders as well. Here's your next fill in the blank. Followers should do their part to respect new leaders. If you're disrespectful towards someone who's in charge and God placed them there, then you are wrong. Now, this is crazy, okay? This next part of the story is absolutely nuts. All right, watch this in verse 24. And he turned around, and when he saw them, he cursed them in the name of the Lord, and 2 she-bears came out of the woods and tore 42 of the boys.
Amen, brother.
You knew that was coming. You've been waiting to say that. By the way, he's a track coach. Well, he was a track coach, so he's probably had to hear some trash talk from his kids. So they're sitting out there. They say, "Go up, you bald head." And then some bears come rushing out to maul them. By the way, next time one of you thinks it's a good idea to call me fat, I hope you're ready for a couple of grizzlies to come rushing out of the back of the room. But seriously, this is a wild story, right? Some kids call him Baldy, and they get eaten by bears. Well, I have 2 questions for you. Number 1, if you're a kid and you see 41 of your friends get attacked by 2 bears, why are you still standing there? That's question number 1. Question number 2, this is probably the more important question. Why would God put this story in the Bible? Why is this there? Why do we need to know that a couple of kids making fun of a prophet were attacked by Yogi and Boo Boo? Why is that in there? Well, I can't really answer the first question, except that it seems like there was actually more to the story. Some scholars that I've read, and I'm not sure this is true or not, but I guess one of the theories about this story is that Elisha was on his way somewhere, and these young boys were trying to keep God's prophet from going in. They're there talking trash and telling him to go up because they don't want him to go into the city. So they're saying, "No, you go around the mountain. You go up over there. You're not welcome in our town, Baldy." That's the thought. And so God sends these bears in order to scramble the kids so that Elisha can keep walking without them harassing him and trying to stop him, because they're getting in God's way. So these bears, when they came out, they were more of a distraction. Not that they're sitting there like they ate 42 kids, right? But more that they were like chasing them and going after them, and the kids scattered so that he could just keep on walking. And you have to understand that, like, when you're picturing a bear, you're probably thinking of some giant grizzly or a giant polar bear or something like that. But odds are this was actually a Syrian, there's actually a picture of it here, a Syrian brown bear. And so you could see that a full-grown brown bear is not even like as tall as a human, right? Now, don't get me wrong, it's probably not a bear you want to mess with, okay? But they sure are cute when they're little, right? So these are very small bears. They're not eating 42 kids. Okay, but it seems like they may have been there to go after them and to attack them, to force these kids to scatter, to make way for Elisha to do what God wants him to do. But I think there's also another element that we need to recognize. I think that what we can know for sure about this is that disrespect is not something that is acceptable to God. Sometimes we think that our leaders should be our punching bags, right? Think about the way we talk about our president. Either one, either side, right? Whatever party you don't like. How do you talk about the other person? Do you say nice things about them? Do you pray for them? Or are you comfortable saying things you would never say to another human being if they were standing in front of you? Oftentimes we choose disrespect because we think leaders, it's okay to treat them however we want. In this situation, this is God's messenger on earth. and you're going to yell after him and call him names and get in his way, well, guess what then? You're going to get hit by a bear. We don't get to pretend like disrespecting leaders, especially ones that God puts in place, which the Bible tells us is most of them, if not all of them. This story makes me think of the phrase mama bear, right? Any mom in here ever been called a mama bear before? Right? Yeah. Why are you called that? Because you're protecting your kids fiercely, right? Yeah, right? So when you think about this, if you're protecting your children with fire and tenacity, think about it this way. If you're a believer in Christ, are you not also a child of God? Well, I think it's clear that as children of God, he protects us just as fiercely, if not more fiercely than that. You know, the book of Revelation calls Satan the accuser because he sits in front of God night and day and accuses us, right? Now, personally, I'm really good at beating myself up. I'm my own worst critic, and I'm good. But Satan has millennia of experience on me, right? He knows how to make us look bad, and he sits in front of God night and day telling him every single thing we did. I'm sure Satan is vicious, but God protects us and defends us even more viciously. Look at Revelation 12:10. And I heard a loud voice in heaven saying, now the salvation and the power and the kingdom of our God and the authority of his Christ have come, for the accuser of our brothers has been thrown down, who accuses them day and night before our God. God literally takes the guy that tries to make you look bad and casts him into the lake of fire for eternity. Not going to listen anymore. That is my child. I love him, and my son died for him or her. God protects us viciously. As a matter of fact, that's your last fill in the blank this morning. God viciously protects us from the enemy. And just like Elisha, each one of us is called to serve. Now, it may look different. You may not have the same calling as Elisha, but you still have a calling from God nonetheless. And you may have to face some big challenges, but fortunately, Christ is always at your side when you're doing that. Now, church, next week we're going to jump forward in the life of Elisha, and we're going to see how God served through his ministry. And we're going to see how God finally took care of Ahab and Jezebel. But until then, I encourage you to remember that God is at your back, and that as long as we're obedient and we're in his will, that he will be there to protect us viciously from anything that the enemy has for us.